Hi, welcome. We're so pleased to have you all here for this webinar on getting into public appointments. My name is Amelia Underwood-King and I manage the Disabled Leaders Network, and I am a white woman with long blonde hair, wearing a pale blue shirt, sitting in front of a plain white background. And I'm really pleased to welcome you for this event that the Disabled Leaders Network is running alongside the Department for Culture, Media and Sport. Before we get into anything else, just to go over a few access things. So as you can hopefully see and tell, we have British Sign Language on the call, and that should be on your screen. We recommend joining from a desktop computer rather than a mobile or a tablet if you are accessing the BSL, because it just sort of makes it easier for you to navigate that. But they should be spotlighted on your screen alongside me right now. Do message us in the chat if you have any issues with accessing that. We also have captions on this call, live captions, which you should be able to access by the link that's been shared in the chat. Again, please let us know if you have any issues accessing that, and we'll try our best to resolve them as much as we can. And just to let you know, this is a webinar style session. So if you are in the audience, we cannot see or hear you as panelists. So you can sit back and relax and just enjoy. But we do very much want to hear from you and hear your questions and your thoughts. So please do use the Q&A box, which is part of the functions on Zoom, to share your questions and any thoughts you have. And at the end of the session, we will have a Q&A with the panelists. So, but you can send the questions at any point throughout the session, and we will make sure we get to them as much as we can. I think that's everything access-wise. So just to give you a bit of context for those of you who might not be familiar with the Disabled Leaders Network, we are a network of disabled graduates and professionals who all have been sort of identified as leaders in their various fields, and we have a series of public events such as this one that we do, but we also have we do activities, we do advocacy work, responding to government consultations on issues that really matter to our members, and just generally we are a community that support one another, and so we're really pleased to have you here, and I hope this session will be beneficial to you. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Fiona Darcy from the Department for Culture, Media and Sport.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. I'm Fee from the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, or DCMS. I work in the public appointments team and like the exciting opportunities we have across government, but I will mostly focus on DCMS. So to give you a bit of an overview about what public appointments are, they are board member roles at public bodies, so organisations that are funded by the government or are at like arm's length of government. And there's usually some sort of legislation that means that the government appoints the board members of that organisation. At DCMS, we have a really broad range of organisations. So that can include the Charity Commission, which Pippa is here. She's a board member there. All the way to the British Museum, UK Sport, and the Gambling Commission. These board roles aren't your like ordinary day jobs. They are very much focused on being in board meetings and making the strategic decisions about how the organisation will be run, rather than getting into the day-to-day details. For example, you might sign off an overall social media strategy for an organisation or a communication strategy, but you wouldn't be actually writing the posts that go out, if that gives a slight example. At DCMS, we have over 400 roles across the 42 different public bodies that DCMS sponsors. And then those 400 roles really, really vary, but I've tried to break them down into three types. So we've got, oh, don't know why my video's gone. Hopefully it will come back. Perfect. So there are generalist members. So these are people or roles that are there for people that want to bring either like a general leadership or a logic or life experience to that organisation. Then there are specialist roles where someone will be recruited for a very specific technical expertise that they might have. So that could be that they're a digital expert or a legal expert. I like to use the example of at DCMS, we sponsor a committee called the Treasure Valuation Committee. And on that committee, they needed someone that really understood the kind of things that are found when people go metal detecting. So we managed to find someone that had spent the last 40 years of their life doing their day job, which was very much based in finance, and like working all the way up. But the reason he was on that board was because he spent every weekend and every evening he could doing metal detecting, and that was the expertise that this committee needed. And then you've got chair roles. So each organisation will have a chair. These are the high level leaders responsible for heading up the board. So if you just imagine anyone that, like, in a way, the leader of the meeting, and they are ultimately responsible for the effectiveness of the organisation, and they may have specific requirements as well. They're usually the person that would be pulled into a meeting with like a minister to talk about the organisation with the CEO. So I'm just going to my notes. So I wanted to talk a little bit about as well the kind of people we're looking for. And as I've mentioned, the roles can be really varied. So we're really looking for people that will reflect the diversity of the views and the people that live in the UK. We want people on our boards who reflect the nation, and like no prior experience on a board is required for every role. So there are lots of roles that are definitely suitable for people that have not had any experience on a board or experience in senior leadership. But there will be a few roles that kind of thing would be required, but it doesn't mean that everything is, there's a mix. So the kind of things we look for are professional skills and knowledge in a relevant area, and that can be really varied. Lived experience related to the organisation. So for gambling, for instance, it could be that you say work in the gambling sector. That could be a reason that we need someone on that board. Or it could be that there's a person with lived experience of gambling harms. We might need someone like that on the board. But then we also need someone that's just a legal expert or a finance expert. And then the other bullet point I had is a passion for the sector and a desire to make a difference. So this is definitely the thing that panels, when they're looking at CVs and supporting statements, will be looking out for. Particularly for DCMS, we have the museums and galleries that kind of are cultural institutions in the UK, and the panel will be looking for people that meet all the essential criteria for the role, but they'll also want to know that the person genuinely cares about the organisation or cares about art or culture and the creative industries. Because you could be the best accountant in the world, but if you don't care about art, then they're not going to really want you on the board. So yeah, that's sort of an important part as well. To give you a bit of a picture about the variety as well, is some roles might require you to do a meeting once every 3 months. Some roles will be more time intensive and require at least once a week. But there is a lot of variety, and all the information would be on the advert about how much time is expected and whether it's paid or unpaid. So the museums and galleries at DCMS are all charities, and charity trustees, there are lots of like rules around paying them, and for the most part, trustees in the UK aren't paid. So those roles are unpaid, but they're usually the ones with the least required time. So yeah, usually the roles that have a higher time requirement will be paid and have that kind of thing. And then I just briefly wanted to talk about actually applying for a role. So all of the public appointments go through the website. The Cabinet Office has set up for us. So you'll be able to find all the open opportunities on there. And you need to have a CV, a supporting statement. It now prompts you to write a short professional biography, but I don't believe it's mandatory to actually fill that in. Equality information and information regarding outside interests and any reputational issues you might want to declare. At that stage, we will check everything and confirm that you're happy with that. And that is also the stage where you can request reasonable adjustments or apply under the Disability Confidence Scheme, which I will talk about in a second. So just to give you a very brief overview of the process after you've applied. So once you apply for a role, there's an advisory assessment panel, so a panel of people making decisions about this role. They will meet and assess all the applications. They will be looking for whether an application meets the essential criteria to the standard that they've set. So they'll usually have a discussion at the beginning of that meeting about what meets the bar for this process. So what they'd be looking for is evidence in a CV or an app or in the supporting statement of meeting that essential criteria. So if it's asking for knowledge about the museum or gallery, they would want in your statement somewhere for you to have explained you have a little bit of knowledge about what's going on at the gallery at the minute or what are the challenges they might be facing. And then ministers are always consulted in public appointments processes. It's different for each department, but for DCMS, the shortlist for interviews goes to the minister, and the minister will agree or maybe suggest that other people are added to interviews. But everyone that is interviewed has to apply. So that is part of the process. You have to apply to be interviewed. Interviews at DCMS, the vast majority of our roles, there is only one interview. There's a very tiny number that will also have either like a media test where someone in our comms team will pretend to be like a scary interviewer on the news, or very occasionally there are pre-appointment scrutiny hearings, and those are for the most senior roles across all public appointments. So for us, that would be something like the BBC chair. But yeah, that's more just to say for the majority, it's one interview. There isn't like lots of different rounds like you might be used to in regular recruitment. However, the process does take a lot of time. So even though you only submit a CV and a statement and then usually have one interview, you might be waiting quite a while between that and finding out whether you got the role or not. But we will always try and tell you and let you know what's happening. And then I just really wanted to quickly touch on, because I realise I might have gone over a bit, the Disability Confidence Scheme. So all departments in government are a member of the Disability Confidence Scheme. It's a government scheme. At DCMS, we are committed to offering interviews to a fair and proportionate number of disabled people that apply. And what that means is when you apply, there is a box where you can tick whether you want your application to be considered under the Disability Confidence Scheme. So if, for example, we see an application that has been ticked, it goes through the exact same process. However, for DCMS at least, at the end, when the panel have discussed who they want to interview and who they do not want to interview, the person on the DCMS side, like the admin person in the room, so that's sometimes me, would say, okay, these applicants ticked that they would like their application considered under disability confident, and you've said you wouldn't provide them an interview. Can you either explain why they would not meet the bar for an interview, or can you reassess them to see whether they've just slipped through the cracks because there's 300 applicants and it's for 3 roles? So that's usually what the Disability Confidence Scheme means. The language that the Disability Confidence Scheme uses will say kind of like the minimum criteria. So what that means as well is that the panel will really be assessing, well, what is the essential criteria for the role? Have we raised the bar because we had too many applicants, but actually this person has met the essential criteria for the role, so should be interviewed on that standard. And then for at least DCMS, it means if you do not get an interview, we will provide a few sentences about why the panel chose not to select you for interview on this occasion. And then very quickly on reasonable adjustments as well, I'm very happy to answer questions at the end. Reasonable adjustments, like all job applications in the UK, sorry, I've lost my place a bit. You can request reasonable adjustments when you submit your application, but you can also contact us before. So even if you haven't chosen what role you might want to apply for, you can talk to us about what reasonable adjustments might be available to you. We always recommend that you tell us what you would like. You don't need to tell us about your medical history or what condition you have, but if you tell us, hello, I would like, if I get an interview, I would like to have the questions in advance, we can usually accommodate that. Or things like making sure the interview locations are accessible. We can provide documents in different formats. We can support having assistive technology at interview or using it for the application in some way. But yeah, the main thing there is let us know, and the department will happily have a conversation about what is best for you. And we are definitely very supportive of people getting their reasonable adjustments. Very briefly, is that the roles that you apply for, the organisation itself would then be responsible for a reasonable adjustment once you're in post. So as the department that appoints you, we would support you throughout the process of getting the role. And then once you're in the organisation, they would support with what adjustments you need for the role itself. But that was mainly what I wanted to say, and I'm happy to pass over to Alex or Paul.
Thank you, Fiona. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So my name's Paul, and I lead the Department for Education's Public Appointments team. I'm a white male. I'm follically challenged, shall we say. I'm currently wearing a salmon pink shirt, and I'm working from home today. So the background is a bookcase that I more or less remembered to tidy up last night in anticipation of the event today. I just want to give you a little bit of background about DFE to start with. So we are kind of a mid-sized department. We've probably got about 16 arm's length bodies and panels. Our roles are certainly not as glamorous as the ones that DCMS preside over, but we do look after organisations such as Ofsted, Ofqual, Student Loans Company, Office for Students, and Social Work England. And we are proud of the fact that education is one of the bigger drivers of social mobility that there is, and that's kind of our main kind of ethos, is that trying to kind of improve people's life chances. And as part of that, we need people that share that vision on the boards of our public appointments. We don't have any live roles at the moment, but we are due to recruit for Office for Students, Oak National Academy, Ofqual, Ofsted, and Social Work England over the next few months. And I won't go into too much detail about the appointment process or the type of things that we're looking for generally, but some of the primary skills that are common on the adverts that we run are people need to be able to work collaboratively, have an awareness of how boards operate, either through being on a board or just showing an interest in it, the ability to lead change, and as Fee said earlier on, a commitment to the aims of the organisation and a passion for what they do. We also look for people that can think strategically and independently, and that show pragmatism in everything that they do. Some of the other roles are looking for more kind of finance and governance kind of skills, and they're quite common as well. And particularly important is the ability to communicate with people and the ability to have sound judgment and the ability to form relationships. One of the key things that I wanted to get across today is that when you apply for a public appointment, there is a diversity questionnaire that you need to fill in, and departments can see the percentage of people that fill in particular questions. In DfE, one of the questions that is least well responded to is the question on disability. For some reason, people don't generally fill that question in as often as we would like. So I would encourage people to fill that question in, and the reason being that it enables departments to understand whether or not their attraction strategies are working, whether or not we're doing enough to reach people with disabilities or from particular parts of the country. So if you're filling in the diversity questions, I would really encourage you to actually fill it in and prefer not to say. It's entirely your choice, but the information that you provide enables departments to focus on the areas that they're not reaching and get better at that in the future. So that's what I would like to get across. I know that we are kind of on a tight time scale. So if there's any DfE questions, I'll be happy to pick them up in the chat further in the call. And I will now hand you over to Alex from MOJ.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Alex Randall. I am a white man, follically challenged. Also, I'm sitting in a very dull but very cold office in Canary Wharf in London. I work in the Ministry of Justice's public appointments team. My role is in regard to engagement with potential candidates or organisations who might be able to assist when we are looking for candidates for particular roles. I shall try and cover some of the things that perhaps my colleagues haven't yet covered, so I apologise if I repeat anything that's previously been said. The Ministry of Justice, as you can probably guess, is engaged with regards to things like prisons, courts and probation. So a lot of our arm's length bodies, or public bodies as they're also known, relates to those organisations. We have about 2,000 plus appointments across our network of public bodies. And as Fee's explained, they come in a wide variety of different types, from bodies that are looking to make executive decisions on particular areas of legislation or the justice system. My example for that would be the Parole Board. The Parole Board members, who are public appointees, make risk assessments on whether an individual is suitable to be released when they reach that part of their sentence. We have advisory bodies that provide details of how different parts of the different parts of the justice system operate. So that would be criminal, civil, family, that kind of thing. Those bodies, although they're looking for sort of information from what happens on the sort of coalface side of things, as well as having solicitors and barristers, they're also looking for lay people who are maybe customers of those types of areas of the justice system. So it's a broad range of things. We also advertise our vacancies on the website, the Cabinet Office website that was mentioned earlier. We have some vacancies currently there. One is for a non-executive director to sit on the board of something called the Criminal Injuries Compensation Scheme, which is responsible for making payments to victims of crime. As well as what Paul has said and Fee has said, what we're looking for is people who are interested to put something back into society with regards to maybe they've had a career previously and they're looking to maybe have a portfolio career so they can have a range of different jobs that aren't necessarily connected, but as a whole create a week's worth of work. I think one of the questions I caught sight of as we were talking earlier talked about, are you looking for people with experience of being on a board? We try and look for people who've got the ability to carry out what's required of that board. So it doesn't necessarily mean that if we're looking for the chair of a board, that they have to have previously been a chair. So it's the skills and background and life experiences that you bring that we're looking for you to sort of engage and play an important part in the justice system for the country. So I'd just like to say thank you very much for spending your lunchtime with us today, and I'll pass back, I think, to Amelia.
Thank you so much, Alex, Paul and Fiona. I think it's just so helpful to get that overview and a sense of what each of your departments focuses on and the different offerings available. I can see we've had quite a few questions coming through, so we will come to those. But in the meantime, I would love to welcome Pippa Britton, sorry, my papers have all gone funny. Sorry, Pippa Britton, OBE, who is a double Paralympian and also the chair of Public Health Wales, I believe, and also a board member for the Charity Commission. So Pippa has lots of experience in these kind of public appointment roles, and it would just be great to hear your experience, Pippa, and any advice you have, and just what it's been like for you carrying out those positions.
That's great. Thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for taking the time out today. Just to introduce myself, I'm a white woman. I'm a wheelchair user, but you can't tell that on the screen because you can only see my head and shoulders. And the wall behind me has a number of medals and certificates, various things that are associated with my archery career. So for those people who can see it, it's more interesting than I am, to be perfectly honest. So I think it's really interesting, actually, because my background in public appointments and in governance generally comes from my archery career. And lots of people ask me, you know, how on earth did I get interested in governance? And governance actually sounds very boring, doesn't it? And for me, it was a case, I think, like many people who get involved at a local level with a club or a society or as a school governor, somebody has to do something, and so they put their hand up. And in my case, it was being on the archery team of Great Britain, and we needed an athlete representative. So my job was to, I got voted in to be the one who went to the performance director and said, you know what, the athletes aren't happy with this or that. And I did that for a while. And after I'd done that for, I think, for a year or so, there was a position for an athlete representative for World Archery. So representing archers across the world around rule changes that would affect them. And my first meeting, I went along because we actually had a category that was for men only. Now, this wasn't 1950, this was 2010. And I thought, well, that's not right. I have a very strong sense of what's right and what's wrong, and I felt it wasn't fair. So I went along to my first committee meeting at World Archery and I said, why don't we have a category for women? And they said, there aren't enough women. I'm like, well, that'll be because you don't have a category for them. So I went away and I approached people in different countries and I said to them, if we had this category, how many women would come from your country? And then I went back to World Archery with some evidence that said there were 2 in the Netherlands and 3 in Britain. And the Secretary General said, oh, right, we ought to do something about that. And they held that category for the first time in Rio Paralympics in 2016. And for me, I think that was a really pivotal moment because I realized that we all sit on the sofa, don't we, and shout at the news and say that's not right and this isn't right and we should do something to change it and we should get involved somehow. But, oh, well, it's someone else's job. And I decided that if you want things to change, you absolutely have to be in the room where the decisions are made. And that was what inspired me to move into governance once I retired from competing. But that athlete representative is always inside me. And I realized that although I sit in a boardroom where we're making decisions on, you know, running the building and paying people's wages and all sorts of strategic intent, the only reason we do that is for the people who are on the receiving end of the service that we provide. So, for example, we've heard a little bit about museums. So we only run museums, don't we, to preserve things for future generations and so that our children and our friends and our families can go to museums. So it's for the public at the end of the day. And every role that I've ever done has been something that I care about passionately, that makes a difference to people's lives. And that's why I do what I do. So I'm on the board of the Charity Commission at the moment because charity has direct impact on supporting the most vulnerable people in our society very often. And Public Health Wales, it's about improving the health of a nation. I can't do that on my own, of course, but it's about that supporting others to be able to make that difference to people's lives. I've been on the board of UK Anti-Doping, which is about fair competition. You can imagine with a sporting background, I really care about fair competition. So all the roles that I do is something that speaks to me inside. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because you might say, well, what on earth do you know about governance when you've just been shooting bows and arrows for half of your career? And I think my first public appointment was on UK Anti-Doping, and I joined I got interviewed, I joined the board, and I remember the chief operating officer saying to me, we need somebody to be on the audit and risk committee, and would you like to volunteer? And I was like, well, I don't know anything about audit or risk. And he said to me, but you've been an athlete. And I said, yes. And he said, when your coach is telling you what you need to do to improve your performance, then that's audit. Your coach is saying you need to look at what you're doing, what your performance is, and then put steps into improving it. And risk is when you fly abroad, how many bows do you take with you? How many arrows do you take with you? What do you do if something breaks? It's all about the consequences of what might happen and what you might do to mitigate that. So, for example, if I think British Airways, I shouldn't blame British Airways, but still, if I think British Airways are going to lose my bow, if I put one of my bows in my case and one of my bows in my friend's case, then hopefully one of those cases will get there and we'll both be able to shoot in the competition. So that's mitigating risk. So it's interesting, isn't it, about how we view our skills, our experience, our life experience, and then we think about how we could translate that into the work that we do in the boardroom. So when people say, you know, do you have any skills or experience? And very often we think, well, I don't know anything about governance. It's about thinking, what can you contribute that is a skill that they're looking for in their essential criteria on their application form, but start thinking about it in those kind of everyday language rather than necessarily the sort of complexity of governance speak. And I think that takes me to something around the application process as well. I found it really helpful over time to take all of the essential criteria one by one, and when you go through your supporting statement, just write a heading for each one and have a little description about how you think you fit into that role. And I found that really helpful way of framing my supporting statement. I would say actually that having been on interview panels as well now, I think, you know, I would say to people, follow the rules is what I would say. If it says your CV can't be more than 2 pages, then don't make it 6. If they say your supporting statement is 1 sheet of A4, then for goodness sake, don't go over that. Those things I think are really helpful. I think we've already had some advice in terms of reasonable adjustments. And I think my plea to DCMS, in fact, would be to give us some examples in advance of the things that we could be asking. So that's my little bit of feedback to them rather than to all of you. Everybody has to have a first role though. And I think having some experience as a charity trustee or a school governor or a representative or member of a trade union, all sorts of, all sorts of examples like that, I think are good help for you to understand what goes on in committees and how they're formulated and what an agenda looks like. And those things that you would, when you get your first role, you're going to have to deal with because things work in quite a formula way. I think there's often the opportunity to reach out to the chair or the vice chair of an organisation to have a chat to them first, and they can also give advice on the organisation itself. And I think that can be really helpful. I think, the other thing I would say is anybody with a disability, anybody who comes from what you might term as minority groups in society, we all of us constantly having to ask for things. It doesn't matter whether you're asking for a quiet space, whether you're asking for a prayer room, whether you're asking for accessible, somewhere which is accessible for your interview. I think that we need to be confident in ourselves to approach DCMS and say, do you know what? These are things that I would need, and can I have things in a different format? All of those sorts of things I think are really important for us to be confident in asking. I think I get asked lots and lots of questions about public appointments. People say, how much time does it take up? And that depends on the organisation that you apply for, and it depends on the kind of role that you apply for as well. I'm chair of Public Health Wales, takes up 3.3 days every week. Well, it actually takes up 4 days every week, in fact, or a bit more if I let them. And that's something as well in terms of the time commitment. It's very often more than is written down on a piece of paper. I think what's written on the piece of paper is kind of like, this is the bare minimum that you can get away with if you're not particularly interested and don't want to do lots of background reading. But if it's something you care about passionately, chances are you are going to spend more time. And to start with, there's a bit of a learning curve, doesn't matter what organisation you go to. So it's about being prepared to do that. And I think, telling your current employer, if you're working, that you are applying for a role or have been appointed, it's really helpful for your career to show that you're developing, which is important, but also you don't know what kind of support they'll give you in terms of time off. I could go on for a very, very long time, but I will end up actually just in saying what the most rewarding things for me that have come out of being involved in public appointments. There is a sense of satisfaction always when you feel like you're making a difference to people, and that's important. It's given me a wider friendship base. I've met lots and lots of really interesting people. Some have gone on to be very, very good friends of mine. It's given me the opportunity to mentor people and to be mentored, and that's helped my personal development, but it's also meant that I've been able to help somebody else. And I was at a sports awards last week, in fact, and somebody came running across the room towards me and gave me an enormous hug and said that I'd given her some advice a few years ago, and it had really changed her life. And so, you know, that's something that you don't get every day. And it's only because I've been on a board with her and I'd had the opportunity to talk to her about something. So the question is, even though there's quite a time commitment and a lot of reading of papers, which, you know, sometimes when you're approaching that kind of boardroom environment and you've got lots and lots of pieces of paper in front of you that you've got to read, question is, would I do all of this again? Would I apply for public appointments? And the answer is yes, I would. I think it's been really rewarding, and I think there's just something, isn't there, about feeling like you have the opportunity to contribute something to society and to genuinely make a difference to other people's lives, and then that's worth all of the hours that I've put into it. So I'm really happy to answer questions. If I had one final bit of advice to leave everybody with, it's that the most important thing that you can bring to a public appointment is just to be sensible in your approach, and to be sensible when you're considering what you might have to make decisions on in the boardroom. And it sounds like an underhand compliment, but actually it's a really big one. So thank you. And I will pass back to Amelia.
Thank you so much. Can you see and hear me okay? Yeah, okay. Sorry, my thing was flashing up. Thank you so much, Pippa. It's wonderful to hear your experiences and your perspective as well. I think that's really, I wasn't expecting you to give so much practical advice. That's so useful for those of us that might want to apply. So I really appreciate it. I wonder if maybe we could spotlight Fee, Paul and Alex as well, and then we can go to questions. So I think a big question that people have asked, which maybe I don't know who wants to, maybe each of you might have an example, I don't know, an example of a really great impact. I mean, Pippa, obviously you shared that amazing one about with the archery and the impact you had there, but do you have any other stories of a kind of how a board or an individual on a board has really influenced the strategic direction, or just some kind of really proud moment or anything like that you might be able to share? I don't know.
I'm happy to try and answer that. So my role, as I said, is involved in trying to get in touch with people and engage with them and see if they'd like to apply for a role. I spoke to somebody recently who came to me and said, well, that they were interested in the work of this particular body. They thought that they could add something, but one of the criteria they weren't so sure about. They thought, I'm not sure I can get everything. So we had a discussion and I said, look, if you really are passionate, like was mentioned earlier, and you really have an enthusiasm for what you want to do, there's nothing to say you can't say to the organisation, look, I've got some evidence against this criteria, but it will require me probably to learn on the job. Some of these things I haven't got immediately, but I think there's enough in my experience, in my ability, that makes it a good thing for me to apply. And I will always ask people to make that application, because at the end of the day, the experience will probably be worthwhile. If you get to the interview, you may get some feedback if you're not successfully appointed, but you get to learn something about how the process works. And I think that's really, really valuable. One of the challenges we have is that, I think was mentioned earlier, if we're advertising for one role and we get 50 applications, there will be 49 disappointed people and there will be one person who's happy. Now, that's not a great return rate. If you've applied for something and you're not successful, and you think, well, how likely is it that I'm going to get that role? It may not be that first application you make, but I'm sure that you will learn something from the experience, and it'll give you a sort of a chance to then move on from that. So enthusiasm, yes. Some make sure that you try and keep applying, but don't just give up after the first attempt, because it is something that's quite difficult to get immediately. But just keep trying. That's what I'd say.
Thank you, Alex. Pippa, did you want to?
Yeah, I think I would agree with that, and always seek feedback. And I think, you know, it's one of those things that I think panels getting better about the kind of feedback that they give as well if people aren't suitable. And it might be that you're not suitable for one thing, but you are for something else. So I would absolutely agree with Alex that you should keep trying. I think that's a sort of it's not everybody can get that, can they? So I did notice that there was somebody just asking a question about hybrid working, and I think most boards now, in my experience, offer hybrid working as a routine thing. And I mean, certainly if you have a disability, it's very often, you know, so much easier to work from home than it is to be traveling halfway across the country for a meeting. And I do most of my work from home, so just as a reassurance, I guess. Thanks.
Thank you, Pippa. Paul, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I was just going to say about the kind of when people are looking at the vacancies, there's always contact details. And Alex alluded to the fact that he'd had a conversation with somebody. At the end of them contact details, there's a team of willing people that are happy to explain the role to you, put you in touch with someone that can give you more detail if you're not sure. So I would certainly encourage people to contact departments if they think that they might be suitable, but they've got questions, to do that, to talk about the reasonable adjustments as well. And rather than saying they need a reasonable adjustment, maybe get in touch with someone and explain what that is as well, so that we can kind of work with people around them type of things. And also to reiterate what Pippa's just said, hybrid is very much the way that DFE does things. I think it works on a number of levels. People don't have to travel. That cuts down the budget that we need to allocate as well. So there is really good, sensible reasons for hybrid working. I think most departments are pretty supportive of that.
Brilliant, thank you. I guess leading on from that, I saw a question about any, and Pippa, you did address this, I think, but any sort of advice for stepping stone type roles, so like being on a school governor board, or does anyone just want to come in there with any other advice or thoughts? Yeah, Fee?
Yeah, as this was part of my if I could get to it bits, I would say. So a lot of boards will have separate committees, which can have ordinary members that don't need to go through the full rigorous public appointments process. So if you have an organisation that you are completely passionate about and really interested in, it could be worth trying to get in contact with someone in their governance team, and often those details will be available on their website somewhere. If, for instance, it's a DCMS one, please do get in touch with me and I can have a look and see. But an example could be the British Library has its own separate advisory board as well. So they've got about 30 people on an advisory board, but the actual main board is 12 people that are appointed through public appointments. So yeah, there's always lots of different ones like that as well.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Alex.
Yeah, I mean, if you're interested in how a board operates or how a particular board operates, it might be that they give the opportunity for members of the public to come in and view them at work, as in a meeting where you can attend as a member of the public. It might not allow you to look at or view everything that they discuss, but it will give you a chance to see how the meetings operate, what the relationship is between the chair and the members, and that kind of thing. Just gives you a starting point as to what might be expected if you were appointed to that role.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. I think a question that's maybe beyond the application process was the kind of how the impacts of these public bodies and the boards are measured. I don't know if you can comment on that, but just kind of what I guess what the aims of these bodies are, of the boards are. Sorry, Alex.
So it may not be that they're directly setting policy. Some of these organisations will be enacting the policy that government has decided to put up through legislation. It might be, if it's an organisation that's advising government on how things operate for us in the justice system, that advice then goes forward to other parties to potentially develop what policy or governance or guidance documents might look like. So it does really depend on the nature of why that body exists, what things it's looking at, and what its objectives are. So yes, that's probably my closest I can get to an answer for that one.
Thank you, Pippa.
Yeah, I think there is something around making sure that the organisation is doing what it says it's doing or what it's supposed to be doing. And this is everybody's money that we're talking about here. All public appointments are funded, by like the government, and everything's funded by our taxes, isn't it? So it's our money, and it's a question of making sure that money is being spent where it should be being spent, and making the difference that it's supposed to be making. So I think that's what I would say for most boards where we're talking about independent people who are sitting on the board. That's what their role is just to make sure that things are happening the way that they're supposed to be happening. They're not doing the doing. There's a wonderful expression that says noses in, hands out, and that's absolutely, you shouldn't be doing the doing. What you should be doing is you should be looking at it to make sure that money's being spent wisely and that things are happening in the way that they should.
Okay, that is a I've not heard that expression before. Paul, I wondered if I could come to you just specifically about the roles you have available, because within our network we have quite a strong focus on wanting to improve higher education for disabled people in particular, and it's something that a lot of our members are really passionate about. So I guess my question is kind of, can we bring that passion to these roles? Is that kind of welcome, and is that will the some of the boards that you have, would that kind of be an area of their work?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the key roles that probably fits that brief is within the Office for Students. They've got a student representative board member, and that person has to have been within higher education for within a period of time of the role going live. So that's one certainly for people to look out. I can't remember off the top of my head when it's due to go next, but probably within kind of a year or two, there's likely to be something out there for the student representatives. So, and within the education sector as a whole, I think kind of it's that passion for education. It's that needs to come through from people. So that role in particular is going to be suitable to somebody with recent educational experience.
Okay, excellent, thank you. And then I guess maybe just finally, I don't know if each of you want to answer, or if it's kind of the same for for all of you, so one can answer. Just to clarify who is eligible, I think we've just had quite a few questions about, like, so, you know, yeah, who is eligible? Alex, yeah.
Yeah, so for each of the vacancies, there will be eligibility criteria described. For the Ministry of Justice and potentially for other departments, there's an expectation that the individuals will be able to work in that country. So that is probably the most obvious one. There may be a requirement if we're looking for somebody who's a specialist for them to be or qualified or registered with a professional organisation. So for us, they might have to be a solicitor or a barrister who is currently operating. So there are probably some criteria there that need to be established and agreed upon before an application can be accepted. But it will all be described in the candidate information that's available with the vacancy details.
Okay, yes, Paul.
Yeah, and I think one of the questions did reference civil servants as well being able to apply. So yeah, so providing there isn't a conflict with the organisation that you're applying for, being a civil servant in itself wouldn't be a bar to actually apply, and it's whether or not that could be managed within the role. So it in itself isn't a bar, but you would just need to check that there's no conflict with the role that you're applying to, and also that the department that you work for is comfortable with you applying as well.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. I guess I know we are running close to time, but I just wanted to ask one final question to you, Pippa, just about kind of if you could comment on the balance of having a disability and taking on one of these roles, and especially if you're doing it alongside, if it is voluntary and you're doing it alongside other things, just if you have any kind of thoughts on that or advice if for any of our members.
Yeah, and it's I think for them, in my experience, people once they know that I need, you know, accessible meetings, for example, and they learn things like I like to be at a seat, you know, closest to the door, because then I don't have to run over everybody's coats and hats and chairs and move everybody, you know, those sorts of things. I think there is something around making sure that people understand that they will have to flex. They will have to book you an accessible hotel room or whatever. In my experience, I've not had any problems with either public appointments team or with any of the boards that I've worked on. Everybody's been very accommodating, and I think, you know, it's difficult because you can't get access to work, for example, for voluntary roles, and that's a challenge. And so that's something I think for each organisation to consider themselves about what they do in terms of reasonable adjustments, because there isn't that kind of responsibility through access to work if you can get it anyway, because the waiting list is so long. But still, we won't go there. But genuinely, I think if you are somebody with a disability, regardless of what that is, whether you need a screen reader or whether you need wheelchair access or whatever it happens to be, I think generally speaking, you get quite used to having to ask for things, and I think it's about making sure that you ask for what you need. And as I said, in my experience, everybody's always been really good at providing it once we've had that conversation. So I don't know if that's kind of answers your question, but I suppose I'm trying to be reassuring.
Yeah, no, it's really, really helpful to hear. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you sharing your personal experiences. I think just to say to I can see a few questions coming through about getting experiences and skills and opportunities. Whilst, you know, just to say that as a network, we do quite a lot of advocacy work to try and push for change in certain areas. So if you're interested in that, we will definitely be in touch about things. Also, just a little plug, we are opening membership this summer. So if you are not a member and would like to join, please do apply, because we do have sort of training opportunities and we try to support our members and things to develop certain skills and have certain experiences and opportunities. So just keep an eye on if you're not signed up for our mailing list, then please sign up. Otherwise, just keep an eye on your emails for that. But yes, Fee, Alex, Paul, Pippa, is there anything any of you want to add before we close?
The only thing I was going to say is I will be sending Amelia all my notes that I was meant to say, and links to the various opportunities that we have open, but also make sure that the link to the general website is there, and any guidance that the Cabinet Office writes, central guidance. But if I can find anything else as well, I'll add to that in.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Okay, thank you so much, Alex, Fiona, Paul and Pippa. We really appreciate you giving up your time to speak to us. And yes, thank you everyone for joining. I can see, as I say, we'll be sending through information, and I can see lots of comments and questions which we'll go through afterwards and see if there'll be any follow-up. Otherwise, if you're a member of the Disabled Leaders Network, we'll be having our closed discussion now on a separate link. And otherwise, I hope to see you all soon, and thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Buddy.